So I was looking through my pile of scraps and I just couldn't find a black piece of fabric that was big enough. Until I remembered about this lovely gown I got from the antique mall for $20. She had already served her purpose in helping me dress up as Morticia Addams for Halloween. So after I said goodbye, I started cutting her up. And before you start to feel okay about me destroying this garment, just remember that it is in fact an antique, and I am basically doing the equivalent of putting carpet over perfectly good hardwood floors. And no, it will never look as good as it did when it was a gown. But sometimes you have to cover a wooden end table with gaudy teal paint if you want to graduate. Okay, so let's break down the anatomy of graduation gowns. So you've got kind of this flat part right here that's above the chest on the shoulders that wraps around to the back. And then you have all this like flowy stuff coming out. You see this line here, that's where it opens. So I'm going to start with these shoulder pads. I'm going to measure out my shoulder width. Okay, so I just made this pattern by measuring my shoulders, putting those measurements down on a paper bag and cutting it out. I got the V-neck down, but I'm going to cut a big part of these shoulders off so there's not all this fabric hanging out. I pinned the pattern to the fabric and cut it out, leaving about 1 inch of allowance on each side. And of course I hand sewed the glorious V-neck. So now I'm moving on to the big flowy part of the gown. Luckily the skirt already had pleats, so I just reused those pleats with slight modifications for the gown. So here's the basic structure for the pleats. I'm going to have one main pleat with folds on both sides, and this is where the opening is going to be, and then the 2 other smaller pleats coming off of it. I'll save you from the tedium of it, but this part basically involves sewing a lot of long, straight lines. Okay, so I'm making the sleeve with this part of the skirt to avoid as much sewing as possible and make it pretty easy for myself here. So all I need to really do is sew these 2 parts together like that and sew it to the main part. And that's what it's going to look like. You'll see, it'll look better when it's actually sewed. I cut the sleeve so it fits on the gown like a puzzle piece. I first learned to sew in 7th grade art class. My art teacher taught me this really easy way to make a knot in the thread. Basically, you make a loop with the thread through the needle, and you take the 2 ends, put them on the needle, and then wrap the rest around a couple times, maybe 3-5 times. And then all you gotta do is pull it down the needle, pull it through, keeping it straight, making sure it doesn't get in a knot, well, other than the knot you're trying to make. And there you go, a little knot. Easy peasy. Then I hand sewed the sleeve onto the rest of the gown. After sewing the sleeves on and adding some side panels, I'm finally done. Just don't look at the back. Also, it turns out I do need to add a zipper because it needs to be zipped up for graduation, but I think I'm just going to do something with buttons. So at this point, I had pretty much used up all the fabric I had, but the skirt had this inner lining, which was a little less high quality, but I used it for the back, and nobody's going to see the back, so it doesn't matter. And as for closing it, I'm not going to do zipper because that's too much work, but I had these little clasps, so I had to sew each one on individually, which was tedious, but it got the job done. So for the mortar board, I'm using the same one I used in high school, because why broke what ain't fixed. I basically made it out of cardboard, I think like some sort of stuffing on top to give it this like padded feeling. Ooh, yarn, and the metal of the Coca-Cola bottle. Also a cool looking charm. I finished making my cap and gown the night before my graduation. They let me walk with my homemade gown, and it was totally worth it and fun to make.